This is the closest thing I have to a cinema roll plushie. I'm sorry. So in November of 2024, I decided that my big cosplay for 2025 was going to be Ironmouse. But I had to figure out which of her many models I wanted to cosplay. And I eventually decided upon her birthday idol outfit from 2023, because it's one of my favorites. And at the time, I had no idea just how big of an undertaking it was going to be. But that was mostly my fault, because I decided to very heavily complicate things. But I'm so glad I did, because I'm so happy with how it is turning out so far. So in today's video, we're just going to go over how I made the skirt, the bodice, the sash, and the bow on the back. Which sounds like it's a lot, but I know that there's even more on the way for things to do. The first thing I started on with this cosplay was the petticoat, because I needed an understructure for the skirt before I could actually make it. I didn't actually record myself making this petticoat, but I essentially just modified the length of an existing pattern. I believe it was Simplicity. But if you're looking for good tips on how to make a petticoat yourself, I would look up Kiralee Cosplay. She has a lot of great tips on how to make petticoats of different lengths, and I think they're very helpful, especially if it's your first time making a petticoat. The first thing I did was measure out the petticoat so that I could get the dimensions I needed to make the circle skirt. And then I plugged all that information into a circle skirt calculator, and I used that to make a half circle skirt. Circle skirt calculators are very easy to use. They just require some basic measurements, pop those in, and boom, you've got all that you need to make any size of circle skirt that you want. Just a helpful online math tool that is good for sewing projects like this. This would become the base I would use for the mock-up. I then cut all of the pieces out of cotton, and once I was satisfied with how it looked, I then cut it out of white satin, which is what I would be mainly using for the rest of the cosplay. And then it was time for the ruffle, or I should say ruffles. Her skirt is actually a 5-tier ruffle skirt. And I've never made anything quite like it before, but I knew that it was going to need more specific calculations than just cut out a bunch of strips and hope for the best. And for this, once again, I turned to math and I found a ruffle calculator online. And this helped me figure out how to make the prettiest ruffle layers that I could possibly make. And miraculously, they all seem to work. So the aspect of this costume that I was the most excited about was the sparkle potential. And that was something that I decided from the start, that I was going to have a bunch of sparklies added to this cosplay. Looking at Mouse's design, you can see that some of the layers are more of a light silver than a white, and I decided to use this particular glitter tool to represent that. It is so sparkly and pretty. I can't. I'm so excited to be able to wear this. Even if it means that there's going to be glitter everywhere in my room, it's still worth it. As you can see, each layer has its own unique design. There are no repeating patterns to how the ruffles are arranged. Some of them have just a plain white with some gold detailing. Some of them have silver with gold trim. And each of these had to be made specifically to try to match the art as best as possible. Probably the most difficult tier being the top tier of the skirt, which is actually the second to the top tier, but I'm dividing this up for a specific reason. And it was because of these little bumpy ridges that it has. So I had to kind of very carefully sew around those and try to make them uniform so that they matched up as best as possible with the trim. And now for some full disclosure, I did wind up having to adjust the ruffle on the skirt a couple times because I did not get the ruffle completely uniform because it was very difficult to sew, especially after once all the layers started to build up. It became really, really hard to actually sew through them. So sometimes the layers would get kind of wonky, and after finishing it the first time, I just wanted it to be done, but for some reason for this particular project, I couldn't deal with just like, it's good enough, so I would have to seam rip the sections that I did incorrectly and sew over them and kind of keep readjusting until each layer sat the way that I envisioned it. And this extra kind of work was a bit tedious, but I'm glad that I did it because it looks better in the end. So, you know, sometimes you mess up the first time and it's okay. If you can go back and fix it and make it better, I think it's worth it, especially for something like this. So after fixing the skirt, the only thing left to do was add in the zipper. And that was pretty easy. I just switched out the foot for something, I don't even know if this is a zipper foot, I just switched it out because it was easier to install. And then I put it in, and that was basically the skirt done. So that's our first piece, and I'm very happy with it, as you can kind of tell. So next up was the bodice, aka the most difficult part of this cosplay. I knew from the beginning that I wanted a structured corseted bodice for this cosplay, but the big thing was that I had never actually made one before. So I knew that this was going to be a lot of work. As a basic overview, the main things that you need to make a good structured bodice are a pattern that fits your exact measurements, some grommets in the back to lace up the laces, and of course, some good boning for the structure. Anything from whale bones to spiral steel to even zip ties have been used by different creators in the past. But for this one, I decided I was going to go all out. I set the metal grommets into the lacing panels myself with a hammer, and I used spiral steel boning for the inside structure. And it's really cool because it's very flexible, which means that you're getting a lot of bend still and a lot of mobility, but you're also getting that nice support. The other thing that I knew would be difficult to find were the appliques on the sides of the torso. So I elected to make them myself by hand embroidering them, because I don't have an embroidery machine, so this was my only option. I made a little bit of a guideline pattern for myself and I set to work, both making it from scratch and bedazzling it with rhinestones and sequins. My first mistake was using a commercial pattern. In my heart, I knew it wasn't the right choice, but I decided to go ahead with it because I convinced myself it would be alright. My second mistake was using a buckram for the interfacing, as it did not want to sit well on my body at all. Still, I was stubborn and committed, adding the lining and most of the trims and embellishments before I finally relented that I hated how it looked on me and decided to scrap the whole thing. Commercial patterns are hard enough to match to your body type unless you get really lucky, but on top of that, I had scoliosis surgery when I was a teenager, so my rib cage is actually slightly twisted, so that made things even more difficult and less promising for a commercial pattern plan. But, taking a stab at this new pattern, I did the classic cling wrap and duct tape method, and cut out individual pattern pieces for both sides instead of making a symmetrical pattern from just one half. This made sure that the final pattern fit me perfectly. Then it was a speed run of redoing everything I had just done, installing the grommets, cutting out the lining, but this time actually putting in the boning. This hurt my hands so much cutting each one out like this. I hand-stitched the trims on the front, then it was time for the front bow. So I did do some working off-screen, and one of the things I have been kind of struggling with is trying to find the pink hearts for the front of the corset and for the shoes and the tiara. And I did some looking around and I just couldn't find anything that I liked, so I decided last night I was just going to try and see if I could make it myself. So for the brooch for the corset or the bodice, we have this, and what this is it's just a piece of EVA foam cut into the shape of a heart, and then I hot glued, yes, I used hot glue. I hot glued some pink fabric that I got for the sash onto this, and then glued on a bit of trim that I got, and then the leftover gold trim from the bodice. And the next thing I want to do, and this is nice, but I think we can make it even a little bit fancier. I got some beads, some pink beads left over from Draculaura. I'm gonna see if I can do like a little bit of a dripping pattern maybe up at the top of the heart, just to give it a little bit more going on, because this costume is just so extra. So we're gonna do that to this and then make the bow that goes on this and then attach it to the bodice. So yeah, the type of bow that I made for all of the bows of this project is based on a loop bow, which I learned about through Sarah Spaceman's videos. In fact, the back bow that you'll see later is heavily inspired by her Hatsune Miku or strawberry Hatsune Miku build from a couple years ago. After sewing the bow together and giving them a quick press, I attached it and the heart onto the front of the bodice. Then it was just doing some nice finishing details, binding the top with bias tape to make the edges clean, and then putting some more trim on it. I didn't have any more gold trim that would necessarily work for the top edge, so I used this really pretty rosette pearl white ribbon that I had thrifted a little while ago from Goodwill. I think it looks really nice on it. Okay, so I am not going to show you the process of actually putting on that ruffle because it was... I had to actually rip out that ruffle because I realized that the bottom part of that was way too long. It didn't look right up against the skirt, so I had to seam rip the top of it and then sew it on and then sew the bottom on separately. So there was a lot of resewing involved, but it's on now, and let me just show you. There she is. It looks so good. I'm so excited about it. There's only some minimal things to do now, just fixing up the lining. I'm probably going to put some bias tape on this just to be extra nice and finishy so it doesn't fray, because it will. And then I have to sew all of these on, and then put all of the sparkly rhinestones and whatnot over here onto this patch. And then the bodice will be done! But we'll check back in on the corset a little bit later. As you might be able to tell, I was working on multiple parts of this cosplay at the same time, so if you see a few things in the background that maybe look familiar later on, they were filmed out of order. But for the sake of this video, we're keeping things sort of in a more understandable order. So let's work on the back bow. The back bow has very long tails, and actually these are called waterfall pleats. And that was a little bit intimidating at first because this is a lot of fabric. Like, this is probably on par with one of the most amount of fabrics that are used in this entire cosplay. And I hadn't exactly made a bow this big before, so I decided to consult with the only cosplayer that I am familiar with that has done something like this before, and as I'd mentioned before, that would be Sarah Spaceman. She thankfully had some of her patterns from her Strawberry Miku up on her Patreon for free, and so I used the bowtail pattern from that and modified it slightly, but used that as a base for these pleats. I then made the bow just like I did before and put some stiff net tulle inside of it, just like I did inside of the bowtails, and that gave it a nice stiffness, especially after a good press. I cannot stress enough how many times I had to iron things in this video, which I think is kind of funny and ironic. Okay, so I was starting to put the bow together, and I discovered this. Somehow, this little black spot got onto the bow. Not sure when or how, but it did, and I'm really disappointed because otherwise it's looking absolutely great so far. But This is bothering me. I'm afraid to try to get it out with like a remover or trying to dampen it because I don't want it to spread, because that would be even worse. I have thought about maybe covering it up. I have more of this applique. I cut off a dress at one point when I was hemming it. I got some extra of this. There's also some of this applique on the gloves, which you will see later or sooner depending on when I edited this video. But I'm thinking about maybe covering it up with that. I'm afraid I don't want it to be too much, because you can over embellish something and it can be too much, but I don't want this black spot either. Like, I know what's going on the back. I know it's going to be covered up. Probably it's not going to be all that noticeable, but I will know it's there and it's going to bug me so much. So I'm going to think about it. I'd have to hand sew this applique onto both sides. I do have another one like this that I can sew onto this side, but that's going to be some extra work, so we'll see. And so she spent the next several hours sewing that applique onto the bow. But the bow was finally done. The sash was actually pretty straightforward. I had to measure out the curve of the fabric while wearing the bodice, and then put this cute gold heart trim on the fashion layers. I then hand sewed the sash onto the bodice, which took some work but ultimately turned out great. Now, we can't forget about the little pin with Booby's little demon form on it. I used the art on the concept art sheet as a guideline to make my own, then printed out on iron-on transfer paper. After cutting it out and ironing it onto a piece of white satin, I sewed it onto a piece of felt to add stiffness. The edges started fraying immediately as predicted, so I glued on some more of that pearl trim before sewing it onto its own little loop bow. After attaching the bow and the snaps, I could finally call the bodice finished. Sadly, that is all the time we have left for the first part of this vlog. I really hope you liked it. I have been working for the past 5-ish months already on this costume, and there's still so much more to do. We still have a wig, a tail, wings, all sorts of crazy stuff left to do, and I hope that you will stick around. Maybe subscribe if you want to. I make a lot of cool things. I do art, I do cosplay, I do sewing things, and I'm going to be continuing to focus on this channel for the near future. So if you like my content, please consider, telling the YouTube algorithm that you like it, because that helps me. I will be sharing more progress photos in the coming months on my social medias as well, so if you don't follow me on there, I am mostly active on Blue Sky and on Instagram right now. So yeah, well, with that and without any further ado, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.